Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful Monday after a restful weekend. I'm just here to review with you a little bit about week 7. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And let's see here, close out some things. So here we are at week 7. I'll just follow the Moodle page that all of you can see this same kind of information. Really, week 7 serves a lot of a review for week 6, where I introduced to you the qualitative research project. So we put some supplemental resources on here about that qualitative research project. So there are a couple of sample papers here that you'll want to make sure that you look at those so you can get a good sense of how to write up your qualitative research. Of course, I know that you read last week in your Hesse-Biber book how to write up your results. And so make sure you review these resources in week 6 to help you continue the writing of your paper. Hopefully you got a good start with the writing of your paper last week. There are also additional resources for this week, including week 7 materials, where you're going to read the final conclusion chapter of chapter 12 of Hesse-Biber. And then, let's see, I think there's a week 7 PowerPoint that shows you the different components of your qualitative research project. So you'll want to make sure that you look at that. And then there's, for week 7, a sample write-up of how you write up your results for your qualitative research paper. So let's just kind of review what's due this week. You're going to have one final discussion forum reflection that is due. And basically for that discussion forum, you're just going to reflect on what you've learned in this class. You're going to describe 3 lessons that you've learned from this experience of doing qualitative research. So you'll post your discussion post by Wednesday, and then your 2 replies to your classmates on Friday. Then you're just going to continue writing up your final research paper. And then you might also begin work on your video presentation. So that's pretty much a review of week 7, but I'd like to just kind of walk through this PowerPoint that I've created, and I'll provide you with a link to the PowerPoint. This was similar to a resource that you reviewed in week 6 last week, but I went ahead and added a couple of things to just clarify. Your Education 740 final project is due on week 8 by Sunday at 11:55 p.m. And you're going to upload on VIA 2 documents, which is going to be a written paper that's around 15 to 20 pages. And then also the second document that you're going to load up is a video presentation. This can be 5 to 7 minutes. It can possibly be a YouTube link of your written presentation, or it can be a narrated PowerPoint. But we need to see some kind of visual of like a PowerPoint or a Google presentation of some sort. If you narrate that, I mean, you will need to narrate it however you want to do that, but you'll need to make sure that you know, I'm able to see it, I'm able to hear you, which that usually creates quite a bit of space on your computer. So that's why you need to probably make a link out of that presentation. There are a number of ways for you to do that. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Okay, what I'd like to do next is just walk you through some expectations. In your syllabus, there is a rubric for your final project. The rubric is on page 27 of your syllabus. So as you're writing, make sure that you follow the rubric. One of the expectations on the rubric is APA. So this is an APA style paper, a formal paper. So I should see in your paper in-text citations where you're paraphrasing authors from scholarly sources that you use in what's called just a little mini literature review in the first part of your paper. You should be citing some other scholars to support your topic or the need to do research on this topic. You want to limit the amount of direct quoting that you do. However, direct quotes of participants interviewed are encouraged. So we really expect you to paraphrase, writing what you read from other scholars in your own words, and then giving them credit, like Trogdon, 2019, instead of quoting exactly what I say. In your dissertations, we're going to expect more of the paraphrasing than the direct quotes. However, when you write up your results section, you'll want to directly quote your participants. For example, participant 1 explained, quotation mark, say what the participants say, and end with a quotation mark. References in APA, are also required. That is the last page of your project. So any content that you cited with in-text citations, you're going to put on your references page. And these are other researchers that you have quoted or paraphrased in your paper. You're not going to put your participants on the references page, but other scholars. All right, so I'm going to walk through each component that is a required component of your paper. The first page of your paper, of course, is going to be a title page. And so you can look at those sample dissertations sample qualitative research papers I put under week 6 to show you what your title page should look like with your name and the assignment and so forth. Next, your second page is going to be an abstract where you're going to summarize your qualitative research project, and it should be between 150, 200 words. It's probably will be the last thing that you write once you finalize your project. You'll just want, in your abstract, you'll want to write a self-contained summary of your paper that should give you a good sense of what your paper will review. If you go to page 343 of your Hesse-Biber book, you'll see what a sample abstract looks like. You can also go to this link, What's in an Abstract, to get a good idea. The next section of your paper is going to be titled Section 1, Introduction. And so these are all the level 2 headings that should be included in your paper. You're going to begin with an introduction, and that's just a short review of some other literature of scholars that you've read with in-text citations. That's what we kind of call the mini literature review. So you want to find some other scholars that support the need for your study. Again, if you look at the sample paper, you'll see how a couple of students did that. Then the next component heading of your paper is going to be the statement of the problem. So the statement of the problem is what the problem is in the field now, and is really the reason why the research needs to be conducted, because it is an issue in education. And then what is the purpose of the study? So what is it that you wanted to find out in order to solve this problem? Then you're going to write out your research questions. And then in section 1, a heading you're going to have is called limitations. In a dissertation, you have limitations. So this will give you some practice writing limitations or limitations. These are potential weaknesses in your study that are mostly out of your control, such as limited funding. A limitation easily could be in this particular project that this class is an 8-week class. So you were kind of limited with time to write this research project, and that is perfectly acceptable. Most research projects take more than 8 weeks. So if you want to list that as a limitation, that would be fine. Delimitations are the parameters that you set as the boundaries of your project. So those delimitations are within your control. So it could be that you limit a delimitation of your qualitative research project is that you decided to only your research participants you decided to include only as elementary buildings, and you excluded middle school and high school or secondary schools from your study. If you look at the qualitative dissertations that you did for your 2 dissertation research reports, you'll find examples of limitations and delimitations, and some of you talked about that as you reviewed those. Then you have your definition of terms, and look at your example papers there under week 6. Those are the most important terms that you believe form your study and that need to be clarified for the reader. And then every section, including section 1, is just a brief summary of everything that you've talked about in section 1. All right, let's look at the next major component of your paper is section 2, called research methods. So this is basically how you set up your study, okay? So you're going to, again, give an introduction, and your introduction is just going to kind of highlight how you designed this particular section, introduction to the research methods section. Then you're going to talk a little bit about your rationale for your research design. You might want to include in here whether this was an exploratory, a descriptive study, or an explanatory study. Then you're going to talk about how your interviews were set up, as well as your participants. Artifacts, excuse me, and documents are any other documents that you used to help you with your study. For instance, let's say you were wanting, your qualitative research project was interviewing teachers on the professional development that was provided in a school district. Artifacts and documents that you might pull down with or include in addition to those interviews could be maybe the district's professional development policy. So if you get a copy of that policy, does that policy match what the teacher said about professional development, or are they misaligned? So a lot of times qualitative researchers include, in addition to interviews, artifacts and documents to support the interview process. It might, again, it might be a board policy. It might be, if you're examining the district's reading program, it might be the district's curriculum that you analyzed. So that's an example of artifacts and documents. And then in the very beginning of your Hesse-Biber book, you read a lot about ethical considerations, how you consider your own ethics in the design of your study. So what ethical considerations were important for you to consider to eliminate any personal bias or any possible obstacles to your research that ethically you believe you had to pay careful consideration to as you designed your study. And then you'll talk about what was your process that you wanted to put in place to actually analyze your data. What did that look like in terms of a coding process, a systematic coding process? And then you simply summarize all of that. So your summary and your introduction are really kind of very similar. And, you know, a lot of researchers wonder, well, why do we have an introduction? And then why do we have a summary? Well, that's the way the formal dissertation writing process works. To each chapter or each section of a research project, you always have an introduction and you always have a summary. Section 3 is a fun part because this is the introduction. You're going to talk about the results that you got from your study, from your interview subjects. So again, you're going to have an introduction. You're going to describe your interview subjects. What are the demographics? You know, you'll go back to your field notes and your memos, and that will help you describe those interview subjects as well. And remember, we're protecting our participants, so we're only going to label them as participant 1 or 2 or participant A and B. And then your next heading is going to be the discussion of the themes, where you're going to talk about the major themes that you identified from conducting your interviews. And then you simply provide another summary of your section 3. Section 4, people always wonder, well, you know, you talk about the results in section 3. Is section 4 kind of a repeat of section 3? Well, kind of, but it goes deeper. In section 3, you're only reporting the results. In section 4, you're going to get to kind of interpret, you're going to get to add your interpretation of the data. So section 3 is just the facts. You're not going to interpret what those facts mean. You're just reporting what participants said. In fact, with your discussion of the themes here in section 3 results, you're going to give some actual quoting of what the participants actually said, and look at those as example papers to see that. So section 4, again, takes that just a little bit deeper. So you're going to, again, have an introduction, summarize what you want to talk about in this section. Then you're going to discuss, well, what do these findings really mean? If both participants said something, then what does that mean to you as the researcher? All right, so discussion of the findings means that you get to add your interpretation of those results, okay? You can also support, when you're discussing those findings, you can support it. You might find that some of those findings say the same thing as other researchers. So you can compare and contrast to what your findings say in comparison to other researchers who have researched that topic. If you have that information, you're not required, but if you have that information, that makes your discussion of the findings a lot more credible. In your dissertation discussion of the findings, you will have to support that with what other researchers say about that particular topic and compare and contrast your results with other researchers. Then you're going to say, well, I got these results. What does that mean for current practice? So what? You got these results. How is that going to influence the field of education, or for some of you, influence higher education? So implications for practice, you get to decide that. There's no one right answer on implications for practice. It's your interpretation of your research and what that means for the field of education. And then you get to go further and you can say, well, you know, I had these results and it really puzzles, it puzzles the researchers that so-and-so said this. Perhaps further study is needed on this particular topic, or maybe recommendations for further research might be that, you know, interviews were done. However, the interviewees consisted of only 2 participants. So a study with a larger sample size is needed, or maybe a quantitative, for some reason, a quantitative research study would be beneficial to your research. So if you make a recommendation, make sure you explain why you believe that or why you are making that recommendation. And then the last part is just the overall conclusions, you know, kind of pulling it all together on what this means in your research. So your final concluding thoughts. So those are 4 sections. Your paper is also going to include some appendices. So for instance, the consent form, I don't need the signed consent form, just your blank consent form that you used in your research. And that's going to be 1 page. That's going to be Appendix A. Appendices means more than 1. So your consent form is going to be Appendix A on its own page. Then on the next page, you're going to label it Appendix B and put your interview guide. Ignore IRB application. We did not do that for this project. So you can ignore that. You'll do that for your dissertation. And then if there's an Appendix C, there might have been some other documents. Maybe it was the district's professional development policy. That could be Appendix C that you referenced, you know, earlier in your paper. So any other documents that you believe are important. And then the very last page it will be your references page. And that is in APA style. All of you will be I'm sure you'll be using some in-text citations from your Hesse-Biber book. So the Hesse-Biber reference will be on the references page. When you do your mini little literature review in your introduction in section 1, you'll want to put here the researchers that you referenced in that section of the paper, or if you referenced any other researchers, you'll want to place all of the references on this page in APA format. So look at the sample papers and you'll see how that's formatted. Again, it needs to be in correct APA style with your references. So I believe that concludes your research project. If I can close this out. Quit PowerPoint, and let's see, we'll quit that and we'll get this, I'll stop sharing, and here we are. So again, you know, you've worked really hard, you've gotten to this point, you're ready to pull it all together in your qualitative research design paper, and I look forward to reading that. I will hold an office hour tomorrow at 2 o'clock Tuesday. So if you have further questions about this video or just overall questions about the research project in general or anything else, I'll be available from 2 to 3 tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.